In 1888, New York, the Caldwell orchard looked like a place of prosperity, rows of shining apple trees stretching across the horizon. But behind its beauty hid something sinister. Workers vanished. Children whispered of cries beneath the soil. And one night, the orchard gave up its darkest secret. Stay with me until the end. Before we dive into today's tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And hit that bell icon so you never miss a story and uncover forgotten American horrors. In the autumn of 1888, rural New York existed in a strange balance. Just hours away, cities like Albany and New York bustled with factories, railroads, and the glittering promises of the Gilded Age. But out in the countryside, life moved slowly, bound to the soil, the harvest, and old family names that carried weight like scripture. The Caldwell estate lay on the outskirts of one such village, a sprawling apple orchard. It seemed to glow with prosperity. Neatly ordered rows of trees lined the horizon, their fruit polished by dew and sunlight. On Sundays, townsfolk admired the Caldwell family sitting in the front pew, the patriarch stern and proud, the matron proper and severe. Outwardly, they appeared blessed, their land both fertile and enviable. Yet whispers crept through the town like smoke. Children said the orchard felt colder than other fields, as if shadows lingered too long between the trees. Passing farmers claimed the soil gave off a strange metallic scent after rain. And at night, when the wind rattled bare branches, travelers swore they heard muffled cries carried across the rose sounds. No orchard should ever hold. This was not simply farmland. To those who lived nearby, it was ground that seemed to remember things better left forgotten. At the center of the orchard story stood the Caldwell family, one of the most established names in the county. Their wealth did not come from railroads or city factories. Like so many of the Gilded Age elite, it came from the earth itself. Generations of Caldwells had tilled, pruned, and harvested apples, transforming their estate into a thriving enterprise that supplied cider, preserves, and fruit as far as Albany. To outsiders, they seemed a model of rural success. But behind the polished reputation, the family carried shadows as deeply rooted as their trees. Thomas Caldwell, the patriarch, was a man of commanding presence, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and uncompromising. To the townsfolk, he was a respected landowner, a man whose word carried weight at the town meetings. But to those who worked under him, Thomas was feared. His temper was quick, and his demands relentless. More than one farmhand left his service muttering about cruelty and long hours. Though none dared speak too loudly, his wife, Margaret Caldwell, balanced this harsh exterior with an eerie form of gentleness. A deeply religious woman, she often spoke in scripture-like phrases, her lips curling into a faint smile that never warmed her eyes. Town gossip called her pious, but her children whispered of her strange midnight prayers, whispered in a voice not quite her own. Their children stood caught between obedience and quiet rebellion. Eleanor Caldwell, 16, carried a curious mind and a streak of independence that unsettled her parents. She often slipped into the attic with notebooks in hand, recording observations about the orchard, or sketching strange symbols she claimed she found etched into the old wooden beams. Her younger brother, Henry, just 14, was quieter, earnest, anxious, and eager to please his father. He followed orders without question, though the look in his eyes betrayed a deep, unspoken fear. But it wasn't only the present generation that weighed on the Caldwell household. The family name itself bore the stain of history. Whispers traced back to the Revolutionary era, when the land had first passed into Caldwell hands. Neighbors claimed it had been taken from another family through deceit or worse. Some said the orchard grew so abundantly because it was watered not only with rain, but with blood spilled in betrayal. Whether fact or folklore, the rumors endured. By 1888, The Caldwell legacy was less a blessing than a burden and inheritance that bound them to the orchard and all its hidden debts. And soon those debts would come due. The autumn of 1888 should have been a time of celebration for the Caldwells. Their apples hung ripe, their cider barrels full, and buyers from the city had already promised strong sales. Yet instead of prosperity, the season brought whispers, unease, and the first undeniable cracks in the family's carefully polished image. It began with the farmhands. Men hired to help with the harvest arrived, worked for a week or two, and then vanished. Thomas Caldwell insisted they had left to chase better wages in the city, but their possessions, boots, coats, even payode, were left behind in the workers' quarters. When neighbors asked questions, Thomas silenced them with his usual stern authority, but the absences lingered like unanswered prayers. The orchard itself seemed to change. Travelers spoke of strange lantern lights weaving between the rows of trees long after the family had gone to bed. Some swore they saw figures moving in the mist-tall, thin shadows that did not walk like ordinary men. At night, when the wind howled, villagers claimed they heard faint cries rising from the earth itself, as if the ground were straining to give voice to something buried too deep. Eleanor, restless and curious, uncovered her own piece of the puzzle. One evening, while rummaging in the attic, she found an old leather-bound ledger. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, contained more than records of apple sales. Between neat lists of bushels and barrels were columns of names, men, women, and children, marked with odd symbols. Some names were crossed out in thick strokes of ink, others marked with dates that coincided eerily with the disappearances. Whispered in town, her unease only grew when she ventured near the orchard's hidden well. Unlike the neat stone wells used for drawing water, this one sat tucked in a grove, its mouth covered with warped boards. Margaret Caldwell had forbidden her children from ever stepping near it. "The well is not for water," she would say, her eyes cold. "It is where our family's sins must remain buried." As the season turned colder, the townspeople's patience frayed. Fewer came to buy apples. Fewer dared step onto Caldwell land. Even Henry, obedient and quiet, confessed to Eleanor that he felt watched when he worked alone among the trees. "The orchard knows us," he whispered once, his voice trembling. "It knows what father and mother have done." The Caldwells had built their fortune on the orchard, but now the very land seemed to betray them, bearing not only fruit, but secrets too heavy to stay hidden. By late October of 1888, the Caldwell orchard no longer felt like a place of abundance. The apples that once gleamed red and gold on the branches seemed smaller, their skins blemished, their taste sour. The orchard felt drained, as though it had given all it could and demanded something in return. The first sign came during a storm that lashed the valley for 2 days. Fierce winds tore through the trees, rain soaked the soil, and when dawn finally broke, the Caldwell land bore scars no harvest could hide. At the far edge of the orchard, where the rows thinned into wild growth, the storm had unearthed the earth itself. Shallow depressions had collapsed, revealing fragments of bone and scraps of clothing half buried in mud. The grisly sight confirmed what neighbors had long feared. The orchard held more than roots. Inside the Caldwell house, tension boiled. Eleanor awoke one night to the sound of her parents' voices rising in anger. Thomas's words cut through the floorboards. "You've kept the past alive, Margaret. You were supposed to let it end." Her mother's reply came sharp, laced with fury and scripture. "The land remembers. It demands what is owed. Without sacrifice, we are nothing." The words chilled Eleanor to her core. The ledger she had discovered in the attic suddenly made sense. The names, the symbols, the marks beside each entry. This was no simple account book. It was a record of debts paid in flesh. Days later, disaster struck within the family itself. Henry, obedient and fearful Henry, was sent to the orchard after dusk. Thomas claimed he needed to clear storm-fallen branches, though no task had ever been demanded at such an hour. Henry never returned. By nightfall, Eleanor searched frantically, calling his name through the misty rows. The only trace she found was his shoe, lodged in the earth near the Forbidden's well, its boards broken, its dark mouth yawning open like a wound. Her world tilted in that moment. The orchard was no longer just haunted by whispers. It was devouring her family. Eleanor knew then that silence would only mean more names written in the ledger, more souls fed to the land. And if she dared to speak, the orchard might claim her next. The line between family duty and horror had snapped. The Caldwell legacy was unraveling, and the orchard's buried truth was clawing its way to the surface. The disappearance of young Henry Caldwell proved to be the spark that set the community ablaze. For years, the villagers had endured the rumors, the disappearances, and the unease that clung to the orchard like a fog. But when a boy one of the Caldwell's own blood vanished into the trees, whispers turned into a roar. By dawn, word had spread across the valley. Farmhands refused to work. Neighbors gathered at the church steps, voices rising with anger and fear. The orchard, once envied, was now seen as a place of rot and death, a curse poisoning the entire town. That evening, lanterns in hand, dozens of townsfolk marched toward the Caldwell estate. They carried more than light. They carried decades of suspicion, sharpened into fury. Inside the great farmhouse, the Caldwells prepared for judgment. Thomas Caldwell, his once proud shoulders hunched, moved through the parlor like a man already condemned. When the mob reached the gates, he disappeared into the barn. Moments later, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the night. When the villagers forced their way inside, they found him hanging from a beam, a crude rope wound tight around his neck. His death raised more questions than it answered. Was it guilt? Cowardice? Or had the orchard itself claimed its master? Margaret's fate was stranger still. She was found kneeling in the orchard, her hands pressed into the soil as though in prayer. Her eyes were wild, her lips cracked from endless muttering. "The orchard demands its due," she repeated, over and over, until her voice became a hoarse whisper. The townsfolk seized her, dragging her from the trees, but her gaze never left the ground, as if she could still hear voices beneath the roots. As for Eleanor, she alone remained standing amid the wreckage. Her hair damp with storm mist, her face pale with terror, she clutched her brother's abandoned shoe to her chest. In that moment, she was both orphan and witness, heir to a legacy too monstrous to inherit. The townsfolk did not blame her, yet their pity was tinged with fear. She was Caldwell blood, after all, and who could say what curses lingered in her veins? The orchard, stripped of its masters, fell silent. Its trees sagged with rotting fruit, unpicked and unwanted. No one returned to tend them. No one dared. The land was left to decay, its once proud rows collapsing into tangled wilderness. The Caldwell name, once spoken with respect, was now a warning, a curse whispered to frighten children away from wandering too far. The family's downfall was complete. But the ground beneath the orchard still held secrets that no storm could wash away. After the collapse of the Caldwell household, the orchard slipped into ruin. Without workers to tend the land, the trees grew wild, their branches tangled, their fruit sour and spotted. In time, the estate was abandoned altogether, its fences collapsing into weeds, and its house left to rot beneath sagging timbers. Yet even in its decay, the orchard did not lose its grip on the imagination of the town. If anything, its power grew. Children dared one another to cross the rusted gate and step among the trees after sundown. Some claimed to have heard Eleanor's cries, forever searching for her lost brother. Others swore they saw lantern light weaving between the rows, moving with a deliberate, unearthly rhythm. One tale told of a boy who ventured too near the hidden well and returned days later, unable to speak a word for the rest of his life. As the years passed, the orchard became a local legend. Farmers avoided the land, not out of superstition alone, but because the soil seemed spoiled, its fruit bitter, its cider undrinkable. Even animals shied from it. Horses balked at the fence line, dogs whined at the edge of the trees. Some townsfolk said the ground had absorbed too much blood, that it refused to yield anything sweet again. The Caldwell name itself withered away. Eleanor, the last surviving heir, was sent to live with distant relatives far from New York. She never married, never spoke of her family's downfall, and never again touched an apple. In the official records of the early 1900s, the Caldwell line simply vanishes, as if the orchard had swallowed not only their bodies, but their legacy as well. Yet the whispers endured. Old-timers claimed that on stormy nights, when the wind tore through the valley, the orchard groaned like a living thing, the sound of roots shifting beneath the soil. Some said you could still hear the ledger's names being recited faint, mournful voices rising from the earth, calling out for release. By the turn of the century, the Caldwell orchard was no longer farmland. It was a graveyard of memory, a cursed patch of earth that proved one thing: some legacies refuse to die, no matter how deeply they are buried. Story of the Caldwell family is not simply a tale of one household's ruin. It is a warning etched into the soil of 1888 New York. The orchard that once promised abundance became a stage for secrecy, greed, and sacrifice. What the Caldwells tried to bury, whether guilt, crimes, or curses, did not stay hidden. In time, the ground itself seemed to rise against them, unearthing every sin they had sown. It leaves us with questions that still linger, more than a century later. Was the Caldwell downfall the result of superstition twisting tragedy into legend? Or was there truly something dark that bound the family to their land, something that demanded blood to keep the orchard alive? The truth may never be known, but the echoes remain in the stories, in the land, and in the silence of an orchard no one dares to reclaim. And so, I leave you with this. Would you step into the Caldwell orchard today, knowing what might be waiting beneath the soil? If this story left you unsettled, remember to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the forgotten horrors of America's past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the orchard was cursed? Or was it simply a family consumed by its own sins? Your voice helps keep these stories alive.